Hello there, and thank you for staying with us. Choose to challenge. If you are hearing for the first time that very simple but just symbolic and powerful phrase, it is a call to action on the very urgent need to challenge and bring down all physical, social, societal, and institutional barriers that hamper the development of a very significant portion of our population, being women and girls. Welcome to People, Politics and Power, wherever you may be watching us from across the world. I am Imonia Marere, and we are delighted to have you join us. Today on the program, we host wonderful women who are part of the African Women Leaders Network, a body that comprises over 500 African women cutting across several generations and sectors with a focus on driving change through 6 key pillars of governance and political participation, peace and security, finance and women's entrepreneurship, youth leadership, agriculture, and social mobilization. The group is chaired by Professor Fumi Paramala, who his program, which currently runs in 5 states and the Federal Capital Territory FCT, is supported by the joint European Union and United Nations Spotlight Initiative. The program today is on enhancing women's participation in leadership, as well as eradicating violence against women in celebration of the United Nations Women's Month. Now, you will recall that the world celebrated the International Women's Day on the 8th of March, and once again brought to the fore the key issues confronting women. While it is good and proper to celebrate all that women have achieved, it is very important to highlight and solve the very serious challenges they face and that exist in Nigeria especially. Statistics show that the COVID-19 pandemic, which shut down the world and is still ravaging many parts of the globe, had a different ramification for women in Nigeria. Within days of the lockdown, a significant number of women reported abuses of all kinds. This was indicative of the sort of abuses they still face till date, many of which go unreported. Sexual harassment, exploitation, and all forms of abuses that constitute sexual and gender-based violence are very rife in our society today. We continue to grapple with child marriages, reproductive health rights, girl-child education, female genital mutilation, lack of victim or survivor support, and so much more. Now, compounding the situation is a lack of representation and advocates in leadership to help bring attention to these many issues, with the imperative to see that harmful practices and societal conditionings are brought to an end. The call has been made for improved legislation and policies to enhance women's participation in the nation's decision-making. In fact, calls have gone out asking for a constitutional amendment to open the space for women to receive 50% of elective and appointive offices. The nation certainly achieves more when it opens its political and economic space to women to contribute their quota to nation building. We have as guests on the program today powerful women who would walk us through the prevailing situation and contextualize for us the urgent steps that must be taken to turn the page in Nigeria. We will get to meet them right after now. Stay with us. All right, let's get to meet our guests, all of whom are joining us virtually from different parts of the country. First, let's get to meet Professor Oluwafumi O.J. Paramalam. She is the chairperson, African Women in Leadership Network. Prof, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, welcome. We're also joined by Hassanatu Adegbite. She is the Executive Director, WIMBIZ. WIMBIZ, of course, is Women in Management, Business, and Public Service. Hassanatu Adegbite.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. We're also being joined now by architect Lola Ibrahim, who is the President and BOT Chair, that's Board of Trustees Chair of Women Against Violence and Exploitation, otherwise known as WAVE Foundation. Architect Lola Ibrahim is of the WAVE Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us, Architect Lola. We're also joined now by Dr. Abiola Afolabi Akiode. Dr. Akiode is the Executive Director, Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center, World C. Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center, Dr. Abiola Afolabi Akiode. We also expect to join us at this point in time, Pastors Sarah Ibanga. Pastor Ibanga is the Executive Director, Women Without Wars Initiative. Women Without Wars Initiative, Pastor Sarah Ibanga. Thank you, ladies, for joining us on the program. Let's move ahead. And we hope that the other guests will be joining us in the course of the program. Let me come to the chairman of the Women, African Women in Leadership Network. And here I'm talking about Professor Olufumi Paramalam. You are the chair of this network. And of course, we want to know what this network is all about. Tell us, what was the intention behind setting up this network? What is its composition and the change that this network seeks for women, not only in Nigeria, but across Africa?
Thanks so much for the question. Before I answer it, just to mention that you omitted one of us, Dr. Asmao Adamu. She's also on the show. I know that was an oversight. But anyway, to go straight to your question, the African Women Leaders Network was established in the Nigeria chapter, was established in 2019. The network itself, the global network, was established in June 2017. It came as the result of a high-level initiative of the African Union Commission, along with the United Nations Women. And the whole idea was to provide an inclusive network of African women leaders across various sectors, including the public, the private, the voluntary sector, right down to the grassroots. The idea is to fashion a form of network that can promote the representation of women in all public spaces at the level of leadership. For Nigeria, we have a vision to create space for women. We want to see women leading positive change in Africa and the country. And our essential mission is to create space for the transformative participation of women in decision making. We're not just asking for women to get on the bandwagon and continue the political space or the political culture as it is. We want to actually see transformative change towards sustainable peace and development of our country and our continent. And this calls for very high level advocacy, networking, coalition building, towards the development of women across generations. We're looking at women across diverse spectrum of the polity from all walks of life. We are particularly concerned about intergenerational mentoring to ensure that the women coming up have a platform to express themselves, to develop themselves, building their capacity. We are not a new NGO, and I think it's important that I stress that AWLN is essentially looking to influence and shape the narrative around gender issues, and around women in leadership. We want to be high-level influencers that get involved in facilitating change for women across the board, regardless of whatever organization or whatever part of the country they come from. Thank you.
All right, as more and more of our guests come online, we will be talking to them, we'll be recognizing them. Dr. Asmau Adamu, if she's online now, we want to see her and indeed ensure that she's there and will be participating actively in this process. Dr. Asmau Adamu, thank you so much for joining us, if you have joined us. But
thank you very much for having me.
Oh, great to have you. Great to have you on, Dr. Asmau Adamu. Yes, so let me push this a bit further with you. The AWLN, the goals it has set for itself, and the fact that you have members across the continent. One begins to wonder, what will women's leadership at every level really mean for ensuring that the goals that AWLN has set for itself are achieved, and how does AWLN actually intend to achieve those objectives?
Thank you very much for having me. Just like the chairperson, Professor Fumi, has said, it's not a new NGO, it's an inclusive NGO that has come on board to be able to carry women along, to be able to fill in the gap, the intergenerational mentoring. We need to carry all women along, and the issue of women being in decision making, getting women, getting the right pegs in the right holes, not just having women on board, but quality women that can help in developmental processes, because we cannot leave it alone to the government. So it's an NGO that has come on board across the continent, and it serves as an inclusive network for women in Africa to share our experiences, to peer review, so that we can be able to collectively solve our problems by ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asmau Adamu. I hope that Dr. Akiode is online now with us. We can, if we can see her, let's push that a bit further. Dr. Akiode, if Akiode is not there, let's take Mrs. Hassanatu Adegbite. Right, Mrs. Adegbite, you are online now with us. So let's push this a bit further. The joint EUUN Spotlight Initiative, what is it all about? We know, as we have said in our introductory statement, that women in Nigeria are facing so many challenges, particularly the violence that is meted out against women and girls at every level. And we also know that under the COVID-19 pandemic, that seemed to have been aggravated by the situation that the world found itself. But this initiative, the Spotlight Initiative, which is supported by the EU and the UN, what is it about, and how is it going to help in reducing incidences of gender-based violence?
Thank you very much for that. Well, the joint EU initiative with the Spotlight Initiative is obviously focused on the collective reduction and ending of violence against women and girls. It is paramount to the EU, it's paramount to the UN, and the reason this initiative has come together as one is so that we collectively realize that it is important for all stakeholders, including government, the private sector, and every other stakeholder in our community to end violence against women and reduce it. Now, because government has a role to play, it's important for a lot of advocacy to take place, both individual advocacy, formal, informal, advocacy with systems. So dealing with organizations, advocacy, just gender advocacy as a whole. It's an urgent call to everybody to put all hands on deck. We want to see the gender bill passed, the gender and opportunities bill passed, and so there must be funding to help to push to that, towards that. There must be more advocacy efforts, both collectively and individually, and all of us must reinforce ourselves to ensure that the provisions in the Electoral Act are also addressed, ensure that our constitution in itself is also looked at by the legislature, and to ensure that in everything that they're doing, I mean, we're grateful that the legislature now, all the female legislators are in the Constitutional Review Committee, but it's also to ensure that it goes, runs its full course, so that at the end of the day, we do see changes that we will be able to hold on to, and to ensure that women are no more disenfranchised from aspiring and holding political office.
Prof, let me come back to you momentarily, at least for now. I'm talking about Professor Paramalam. Let's look at one of the objectives that AWLN has set for itself, which is addressing linkages between sexual and gender-based violence and harmful practices with related aspects of sexual reproductive health and rights. How do you intend to address these linkages? First, what are those linkages, and how do you intend to address them?
Well, first and foremost, gender-based violence is a development issue and is also a security issue. The data shows very, very clearly that women and girls are an endangered species, and they tend to be at risk in places where they ought to be the safest, such as in their homes, in schools, in hospitals, and in the care of people that should otherwise be respecting and promoting their rights. We also know that when you look at the various forms of insurgency, militancy, banditry, kidnapping, and what have you, even ethno-religious violence, women have tended to be the primary victims, women and children, I should say. Most of them are populating IDP camps, what have you. It therefore makes it very clear that gender is a critical variable when you talk about development and security. And this is the link that we have seen, and there is empirical evidence to suggest that. Now, what do we hope to do? First and foremost, we hope to strengthen, and we've already gotten involved in that through the Spotlight Initiative, to strengthen the capacity of women's organizations to identify instances of gender-based violence, to be able to address it professionally and properly, and to link up with the relevant public institutions to create a kind of groundswell of demand, public demand for institutions to do this right when it comes to protecting and promoting the rights of women and girls in private spaces. Now, we are not just concerned, I must say, for the girl child or for women. We also notice that even boys have come under increasing sexual abuse and different forms of gender-based violence, such as the boy child being conscripted in the northeast of Nigeria into gangs and into various forms of terror groups. So we are concerned about drawing those linkages and establishing, building the capacity of women's groups at the grassroots and at all levels, and also working alongside public institutions to address these cases, providing a gender responsive system and structure to be able to address all forms of gender-based violence across the nation.
And this, your ambition is actually linked with the African Agenda 2063 and, of course, the Sustainable Development Agenda 2030. Link them for us. Draw a nexus between and among these set goals for Africa and at the global level?
Well, absolutely. In fact, the agenda, the EU Agenda 2063 has made it very clear that human security, at the center of human security, is a concern with gender, rights-based approach to development, and ensuring that women and girls across the continent are protected and that their human capabilities are properly developed. Similarly, the SDGs, we know that among the SDGs, gender equality, the women, peace and security are the cornerstone of these goals. Within Nigeria, we have the National Action Plan for activating the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which is definitely and intrinsically determined within its goals and provisions to look at all the pillars that create and that reinforce gender-based violence. So there is a clear linkage there, and our vision and our goals within AWLN Nigeria chapter are to ensure that we identify those organizations that are working within this sector and help to strengthen their capacity and form a coalition, because we notice that this work is not something that can be by one single network or NGO. We need to have a coalition of effort to build the momentum of women's groups across the country to push for change at every level.
All right, Prof, thank you so much. Let's see if we can link up with Dr. Hasanatu Adegbite or Dr. Akiode at this point in time. We do not seem to have them on the link at this time, but well, is that Dr. Akiode or Dr. Asmao? Hasanatu. Oh, great to have you, Dr. Hasanatu. Great to have you. Right,
it's like you have given me a title, though. I'm not a doctor.
All right, great. Hasanatu, thank you for joining us. And now let's look at the 6 key pillars of the AWLN, which include, of course, governance and political participation, peace and security, finance, and women's entrepreneurship. Let's take one at a time and see how you can link them with the overall objectives of AWLN and the protection of women and young girls who are particularly vulnerable in a society like ours, where there are harmful practices and there are gender-based violence cases on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, because my strength is in the business community and the private sector, I will speak more towards finance and entrepreneurship as it pertains to what we can do collectively and in partnership with other organizations and that's private sector organizations as AWLN to ensure that we reduce some of the hardships on women and also some of the negative consequences and results of most of this sexual-based violence that is affecting us in nation building, because anything that affects women reduces a lot of our GDP, reduces return on investment for even private sector organizations, and at the same time ends up affecting nation building. And so it's important for us that even in our advocacy efforts and all our dialogue, we must identify key stakeholders and decision makers within even the private sector organizations to be able to adopt internally and externally in their own organizations policies and initiatives that will continue to help all these girls that are going through gender-based violence. And how can they do that? Number one, there is funding that is always needed, of course, to address some of these issues. You see situations whereby even when these young girls have, or women have some cases, and they even take it to the police and all that, they are asked to bring finance and all that, and a lot of frustration from funding. So we must be able to influence the private sector to begin to see the need to direct some of this funding towards gender-based violence initiatives. A lot of private sector funding goes to things like sports, music, entertainment, and so on and so forth. So we must begin to influence private sector to begin to commit some of their finance towards addressing some of these issues, influencing their communities. So through direct engagement, direct advising and talking around business networks to be able to influence other businesses and other private sector organizations, even the public sector organizations and stakeholders, to also begin to see a need and find out where we can come in, whether in the preventive measures, in the corrective measures, or in progressive measures. There are different places of intervention. And so what AWLN will also be doing is trying to show them and relate to them the areas within the context of preventive, corrective, and progressive that can be addressed. We must be resolute in even internal policies of private sector organizations, and to also ensure that a lot of them sign on policies like the women empowerment principles that will even help the entrepreneurs and help the organizations to move forward. So we must continue to communicate with one another, influence each other, and collaborate with key stakeholders and a lot of business networks to ensure that we move forward in this regard. Thank you.
Mrs. Adekpite, you understand that a large population, a very large number of our women and girls live in rural communities. And it is in these rural communities that a lot of these harmful practices actually prevail a lot. And that is where a lot of the gender-based violence also take place. I'm just wondering, how penetrating is the work of AWLN in these rural communities? How much consciousness, how much mobilization is AWLN carrying on to conscientize these women and girls, and even the men folk themselves, to move away from these kind of practices? And how much is entrepreneurship and agriculture bringing to bear in promoting this?
Okay, it's important to note, just like you said, the numbers, when we even look at our population as a nation, the numbers are staggering in terms of we're now dealing with millions that are in the rural community. And obviously, a lot of us that are even in AWLN and have started working with so many organizations are more in various sectors of the nation. Now, as AWLN, earlier on, Professor Paramalam said something, that it is also about working with various organizations, a lot of even women organizations, a lot of women network, even as apart from women, I mean, there are other organizations that we are also partnering with. But you see, you first need to find out, we work with the organizations that go into these communities. Now, even though we don't have enough of them, we are still campaigning, we're still lobbying, we're still going, advising, talking, going around our legal frameworks and advocacy, educational programs, fact-finding forums, trying to make sure that we first educate those that we have access to that are actually going into this community. So that is the first thing. The second thing is that it is obvious that where there's economically challenged women and young girls, obviously, even when things like this happen, and they are vulnerable because in so many ways they cannot even take care of themselves and be strengthened. So one of the things, and I know that EUUN Women has also started it with even the Spotlight Initiative, is to begin to rehabilitate these ladies through also various NGOs. And we are trying to create opportunities for access to market. We started talking to sponsors, to organizations, to begin to see how even these young girls that have been rehabilitated, that have been trained in entrepreneurship, in soft skills, how we can scale that up and ensure that we can also connect them with sponsors and private sector organizations, give them platforms for access to market. And I would also say that we have already started talking to some of these organizations. And some have even started thinking of how to get representatives from these rural communities to be the key representatives that will bring some of their products on platforms, digital platforms, that we can help them to sort of push out, while at the same time we're ensuring that the products that they're being trained in meet the required standards. So it is a large task, if I must say, because of the staggering numbers. But the processes have started. We cannot conquer everything in a day. We cannot overcome in a week. Neither will it take a year. But at least we are trying to influence more numbers to be engaged in this and to continue to educate these girls and these women and see how we can empower them to move forward in their economic pursuits.
All right, given the fact that AWLN is just about 2 or 2.5 years old, you seem to have made a lot of progress in this area. But let's bring in architect Lola Ibrahim, who is the president and BOT chair of Women Against Violence and Exploitation Foundation. Of course, one of the major objectives of AWLN is addressing the root causes of gender-based violence and harmful practices such as child marriages, the female genital mutilation, and all such harmful practices. How have you, Architect Ibrahim, brought your experience to bear from your foundation into AWLN and by extension to the larger women folk in Nigeria and beyond?
Thank you for that question. We all know that for a country to achieve full development, women's participation in all areas is important. And developmental transformation and peace cannot come without fundamental change in who is leading and the ways we lead. Now, what has AWLN done, or what is AWLN doing? AWLN has 5 priority areas, like the Prof mentioned. 1, women, peace, and security in ending violence against women. High-level policy, legislative advocacy. Political representation and leadership. Economic empowerment and social investment. Mentorship and intergenerational dialogue. Now, how has AWLN helped in shaping violence against women or in ending it, with reference to child marriages or FGM and all of that? What AWLN is doing is to identify relevant stakeholders to change either structural barriers, institutional barriers, political barriers, and make sure that all the laws, the VAP law, the child rights law, or even the constitution are effective in all these areas. And in states where the VAP law has not been domesticated, AWLN is working, to make sure that these laws are domesticated and they are passed and they are implemented. Not just passing the laws, but to see that these laws are implemented to the letter. Because, Nigeria is big. And sometimes monitoring, it's a big challenge. So that's why AWLN makes sure that they identify relevant stakeholders, like our organization. AWLN, we reached out to AWLN, and AWLN brought us onto the fold. So they find out what you're doing and where you fit in. And, they make sure that whatever it is that you need to do to work well, it's put in place.
All right, thank you so much, Architect Lola. Up next, we'll be looking at how important it is for countries such as Nigeria, for example, to ensure that equitable distribution of opportunities for women in leadership impacts on national development. We'll be back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Our special program today, focusing on gender-based violence and the activities of AWLN in helping to conscientize the women folk, women and girls across the continent, and of course, how much stakeholders across the board can contribute to ensuring that we have women participate in leadership, not just in leadership, but in every sector of the economy, and making their contributions to national development. Okay, so let's come to you, Dr. Asma'u Adamu, and let's begin by asking you the importance of ensuring that there is equitable distribution of opportunities for women in leadership in any country, and especially so in our country, Nigeria.
Thank you very much once again.
Dr. Asma'u.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Is Dr. Asma'u with us? Please
yes, I am.
unmute your microphone and speak with us.
Hello?
Well, if
Are you
Asmao
hearing
is
me?
not ready, let's see if we can get Dr. Abiola Akiode. I understand she has joined us now. Dr. Akiode, thank you for joining us.
Hello? Hello?
Dr. Akiode, can you hear us?
Hello? More than ever
Okay,
before.
let's. Dr. Asmao is with us now, is she?
Pronouncement
Dr.
on
Asmao, please
the
unmute your microphone so we can hear you here in the studio.
some challenges.
All right, let's get back to Professor Olufumi Paramalam. Prof, I hope you are still very much with us.
Yes, can you hear me?
We're looking at the importance of equitable distribution of leadership positions to national development, any nation for that matter, and Nigeria in particular.
Okay, can you hear me? Thank you very much for the question.
Hello,
Can you
Prof?
hear me? Yes, I can hear you. It seems you can't hear us.
Yes,
I
please,
can
go
hear
on.
you too.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Actually, Dr. Akmal was trying to answer your question, and Dr. Akiyode has also now joined us. I'll go right ahead to quickly say that you would recognize that in Nigeria today, less than 3% of the Nigerian parliament is comprised of female parliamentarians. This is an anomaly even for Africa, where Nigeria is lagging behind most African countries in female representation. It therefore makes it clear that there is a desperate and an urgent need for something to be done about our electoral reform, our electoral system, which is in urgent need of reform, about the powers, the compliance powers of INEC to get political parties not just to select and nominate, but also to ensure that women get into elective positions. And I must make this comment that AWLN is concerned about high-level advocacy to ensure that institutions such as the National Assembly, State House of Assembly, the executives at federal and state level get on board in pushing for the implementation of the national gender policy. The national gender policy stipulates 35% of representation and is even being reviewed upward to 40 or even 50%. So the idea for AWLN is that we are now involved in pushing for the domestication of the Gender and Equal Opportunities Bill to ensure that that 35% or the proportional representation of women in positions of power is brought on stream as a reality. We are working across different organizations, women's political parties, and stakeholders within the National Assembly to push for this bill to be passed, so that women can have their due right of representation in the nation. A situation whereby 50% of the population is excluded, marginalized from leadership and political participation is not obtainable, is not tenable either for peace or for sustainable development. I would like Dr. Akuyode to also speak to the issue because she's well situated to do so.
All right, Dr. Akiode, we're happy that you could join us now. Prof wants you to speak to this issue of representation. Again, we have lost signals with Dr. Akiode, but let me move on to Mrs. Hassanatu Adegbite. I'm sure she's still with us. You want to speak to that issue of women representation. It appears that the men folk are actually either being insensitive or are just not listening to the women.
I don't think it's that they're not listening. It's just that, sometimes leadership is very sweet, it's very powerful, and nobody wants to take the back bench. So if you have been benefiting on some certain seats, we are not ready to give up that seat easily. Professor Paramalam sort of spoke on the political leadership. Let me sort of divert a bit to the private sector leadership. When you look at our corporate boards, so nationwide, our boards have less than 20% representation of women that are serving on corporate boards. Now, the implication of that is that we have a nation, for example, let me bring it down to Nigeria, with over 170 million people. And statistics has shown that almost 50% of that, just a slight difference, we're almost evenly split 50-50. Now, with that kind of population, at least we know that we can technically say over 70 million of this population are women. Now, if you also think it through, you realize
Dr. Adebite, well, we seem to have lost your signal, but I'm sure that...
and all that. Now, because the decision makers in the home, obviously, when it comes to the price, you have women on the table that are contributing that are being made into that is covering a mass majority of women that from this population. But
probably one of the pains of underdevelopment
we find out that most research has even shown that, that when there's women on board, return on investment for even the organizations are higher. So it is important for us to note that the need for women on board is for collaborative and progressive reasons, not for competition. And again, the men need to realize that they need to embrace more women on board because they come in with strategic ideas and contributions that will also move that organization forward. So it's very critical to our nation. Look at most developed nations. Those that are doing excellently in their GDP and all their economic output in anywhere in the world, look at most of their structures. Women are occupying leadership positions because we need contributions from both gender to move every nation forward.
All right. Thank you so much, Mrs. Adebite. Let's see if we can get either Dr. Asmau or Architect Lola online now to contribute to this aspect of it. The United Nations says, for instance, that the world needs women at every table, at every policy-making table, and that can contribute a lot more to national and global development.
Thank you very much for having me once again. I'm really facing a lot of challenges on my network. What I wanted to say as regards the gender-based violence, I was trying to talk about the need for synergy, and more than ever before, we have high-level advocacy. The Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, is getting in touch with the traditional and religious leaders, and we are really being on the same page. And the COVID has actually exposed a lot of things. Now, with Spotlight and African women leadership, we are synergizing to do a lot, and people are coming out. And the president's pronouncement is like, we are having goodwill. We are having the political will, because you can see that the Inspector General of Police and the Attorney General, everybody is on the same page on the issue of sexual and gender-based violence. And coming from the governance angle, you can see that the body language and the pronouncement by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria that the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs should work with the Attorney General and the Parliament, that is the National Assembly, to ensure that the 35% affirmation is enshrined, and it's going to cost across the board. Just like my sister have said, both the public, the private, and wherever, when we get women on board, it goes a long way in improving the GDP of any nation. Countries that have developed, you can see small African countries around, they are doing very well. And Nigeria as the leader, I think we are taking the lead in everything, but the issue of having higher percentages of position in decision making is actually a challenge. But with the pronouncement of the president and with the constitutional review that has been done recently, I think working in coalition, synergizing with African women leadership, we are intensifying and strengthening our capacity to ensure that our focus is being achieved. And more than ever before, you can see that the issue of women is at the top burner. You can see that the polity is charged. Women, the government, the private sector, everybody is trying to actualize this dream. And by the special grace of the Almighty, with all the right stakeholders on board, we'll be able to change the narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asma Adamu. Architect Lola Ibrahim, let's quickly take a dive into this. What do you think are those urgent steps that government needs to take to ensure greater participation of women, not just in politics, but in getting them at decision-making tables?
Okay, we need to establish one fact that when women are empowered, they reinvest in their families, in their communities, and that produces a multiplier effect that spurs growth, peace, and security. That's not rocket science, is what we all know. If you give a man 1 million and you give a woman 1 million, the woman will first of all think of her family. The man might think of changing his car. So what does the government need to do to make sure this growth or this developments are accelerated? Is to see that those institutional barriers that inhibit women, from achieving their full potentials are removed. And not just removed halfway, they are removed totally. Political barriers are removed. Economic barriers are removed. Everything that disenfranchises a woman from her reaching her full potential. Take, for example, if I say I want to join politics now, my spouse might tell me who will look after the children. So these are some of the challenges that women face. So now, how does the government come out to help us achieve some of this agenda that AWLN is pushing? There are laws that have been made. Government is paying lip service to some of these laws. We need these laws to be implemented fully. Now, political parties should not just give us a kind of tokenistic, slots. There should be implications for parties that do not include women in elective positions. You understand? And we're not saying that you say woman leader. No, woman leader is not enough. Let women have a level playing field. And then some of these maybe economic challenges that women face, or maybe parties hold their meetings at night, remove all these barriers. If a woman is capable, she has the capacity, the intellect, and the quality to lead, give her the opportunity. And then the development is for everybody. When you bring the women to the table, you're bringing in half of your population to the table. And it's not a fight, it's a win-win situation for everybody. You get it?
Thank you so much, Architect Lola Ibrahim. Let's have a wrap here now with Professor Paramalam. Your last word here, what is the strategy that AWLN is adopting in achieving some of these set goals?
Thank you very much for the question. Like Lola said, first and foremost, we are getting on board with critical stakeholders and gatekeepers to ensure that the duty that they owe to the Nigerian woman is fulfilled. I must put on record that we are very fortunate to have a knowledgeable, articulate, passionate, and dynamic Minister of Women Affairs who is working with networks like AWLN and other groups to ensure that we push this agenda forward. Now, what we want to see is gender sensitive, gender responsive, and gender transformative policies, laws, and we want to see them fully enacted. The idea here is to have the human capacity of women and girls to be fully invested in, whether it's at the level of education, at the level of creating employment, or at the level of health, providing for the gender-specific health needs of women to strengthen their capacity to be fully fledged citizens. Secondly, we want to see the government bringing about reform in the constitutional and electoral environment. Constitutionally, we want the federal character to be expanded to include gender character. We feel that federal character does not currently embrace the full citizenry of women, whereby there is a preponderance of men in politics. We need the Federal Character Commission to become an equality opportunities commission, and we also need the electoral system reformed to make for proportional representation from the local government to the federal level. There are examples in South Africa, in Southern Africa, in East Africa, and other countries to show that this is the way forward to promote equality in political representation, and also to ensure that the policies that are enacted are beneficial to the entire citizenry. Finally, in terms of what needs to be done and what AWLN hopes to do, is to ensure that younger women, girls, the girl child is prioritized. Their voice is heard. We want to give voice and visibility to women of all ages, especially the younger generation, by creating intergenerational platforms for dialogue and for activism. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you very much. The United Nations says that the world needs women at every table, and not just at every table, but table where decisions are being made or are made. And that is, of course, a clarion call on the world, and especially on the developing world, to give women equal opportunities. I want to thank Professor Oluwafumi O.J. Paramalam, MNI. She is the chairperson of the African Women in Leadership Network. Thank you so much for joining us. We're also grateful to Hans Santu Adegbite, who is the Chief Executive Director, WIMBIZ, that is Women in Management, Business, and Public Service. Thank you for your time. Architect Lola Ibrahim is the President and BOT Chair of Women Against Violence and Exploitation, WAVE Foundation. Thank you for your time. And of course, we also had joining us Dr. Asmau Adamu. Thank you so much for your time and for coming on the program. We look forward to a more engaging time with AWLN, and indeed with all other women organizations in the spirit of the International Month of Women. My name is Imonia Marere. Bye for now.